Can I please ask delegates to take their seats so we may begin? We have a full agenda today.
We have quorum.
We will start with housekeeping announcements. Please pay attention. It has the working group schedule in it.
Thank you, Chair. We have 2 working groups taking place during lunch hours today. One is the Shark Working Group. This will take place today at 12:15 in Room B. The Shark Working Group will also meet in the evening, starting at 18:15, also in Room B. So Shark Working Group today, Room B, during lunch and during the evening hours. Also during lunch hours, the Finance and Budget Subcommittee will be meeting in Room 12. For the EELS Working Group, this working group is meeting today in the evening, starting at 18:15 in Room 4. Oh, sorry, 17:15, excuse me. So the evening working groups are from 17:15, both the Shark Working Group and the EELS Working Group meeting from 17:15, EELS in Room 4, Sharks in Room B. We understand that there was a request to avoid the overlaps of the 2 working groups on Sharks and EELS. However, given the number of sessions left and the need to generate COM documents, we were unfortunately unable to avoid a complete overlap. But at least the Sharks working group will start during lunch, and the EELS will begin its discussions this evening. I would also like to remind you that the executive summaries and the COM documents are being published on the CITES website as they become available. So please take a look at them, as the chair may review those documents when the time is available. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I would like to start today's agenda with agenda item 71 on seahorses. And document 71.1 is a report from the Animals Committee, and so I will call on the Animals Committee Chair to introduce this document.
Thank you, Chair. At COP19, parties adopted a set of decisions on seahorses. The first part of the document outlines the outcomes of the AC33, and the second part discusses the recommendations referred to the Standing Committee by the Animals Committee. At AC33, the Animals Committee agreed to a range of recommendations, including the submission of a set of draft decisions on seahorses for consideration at the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. It also agreed to refer several recommendations to the Standing Committee for further consideration, as contained in paragraph 12 of the current document. Paragraphs 13 to 15 highlight ongoing work under several decisions and resolutions that may address these recommendations, including work on legal acquisition findings, stocks and stockpiles, and the study under Decision 19228, which is discussed in the report from the Secretariat in Agenda Item 71.2. The Standing Committee is therefore invited to note the outcome of the discussions on seahorses from AC33 as presented in the annex to this document, including a new set of decisions and the intention of the Animals Committee to propose to the Conference of the Parties the renewal of Decision 19229. B. Agree that Decision 19231 has been implemented and can be proposed for deletion, and C. Consider the recommendations referred to it by the Animals Committee in paragraph 12 and the comments from the Secretariat outlined in paragraphs 13 to 15. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will now turn to the Secretariat to introduce document 71.2.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. In document 71.2, the Secretariat reports on the implementation of the decision on seahorses. To implement decisions 19228, the Secretariat is working with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to prepare a report on global illegal trade in seahorses. The work is ongoing, and unfortunately, the report was not completed in time for this meeting. In line with decision 19229, paragraph B, the Secretariat prepared the document for consideration by the Animals Committee at AC 33. The Secretariat proposes revising decision 19229 and 19230, as well as 2 draft decisions as outlined in the annex. Should the committee agree, decisions 19228 and 19232 can be proposed for deletion. The committee is invited to consider the recommendations in paragraph 8. Thank you, Chair.
So I'd like to invite the Standing Committee now to open discussion on document 71.1, the recommendations in paragraph 16, and the recommendations in paragraph 8 of document 71.2. I have the USA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The North American region supports submitting the revised draft decisions 19.229, RevCop 19, and 19.230, RevCop 19, as well as the new draft decisions 20AA and 20BB to COP 20 as presented in the annex to document 71.2. The North American region believes that decisions 19.231 and 19.228 and 19.232 have been implemented and deleted. With respects to the Animals Committee recommendations in paragraph 12 of SC 78, document 71.1, and the Secretariat's response in paragraph 13 through 15, the North American region has the following comments. Regarding the recommendations in subparagraph A, B, E, and I in paragraph 12, the North American region concurs with the Secretariat's suggestion that these recommendations could be addressed by activities outlined in SC 78, Doc 47 on legal acquisition findings. For the recommendation in paragraph H, the North American region concurs with the Secretariat that the generic guidance in the practical guidance and ensuring effective stockpile management could be applied to the management of seahorse stockpiles. And with respect to recommendations in subparagraph C, D, F, and I of paragraph 12, the North American region concurs with the Secretariat that these recommendations be considered after completion of the report on global illegal trade in seahorses called for in decision 19.228. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other members of the Standing Committee wishing to speak on seahorses? I will now open the floor to observer parties. Australia.
Thank you, Chair. Australia broadly agrees with the recommendations. However, we note that while the Secretariat proposes to take the recommendations included under paragraphs 12C, D, F, G, and I of SC 78 Doc 71.1 into consideration following the completion of the report called for in decision 19.228, these recommendations are not included in the current draft decisions. We therefore propose that reference to these paragraphs of SC 78 Doc 71.1 are included in draft decision 20.BB of SC 78 Doc 71.2 in line with the Secretariat's plan for considering the recommendations as laid out in SC 78 Doc 71.1 paragraph 15. We suggest the following changes to draft decision 20.BB. So following the text 19.229, Rev Cop 20, we would include the new text and the recommendations in paragraphs 12C, D, F, G, and I of SC 78, Doc 71.1, and then continue the existing text. Would you like me to reread that or read the text in full?
It would be helpful if you read it a second time, please.
Sure. So following the text, 19.229, Rev Cop 20, we would then include new text and the recommendations in paragraphs 12C, D, F, G, and I of SC 78, Doc 71.1 before continuing the existing text. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Senegal.
Bonjour, madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, colleagues. We have taken the floor in order to say that we would like to have the working group on seahorses continue with its work. We have been affected by suspension of trade, and we think that's a mistake because we do honor our CITES obligations. A study was carried out in Senegal, and there was no report made on our exporting quantities of seahorses, and we don't do that. So we would like to hear from the Secretariat to see how they can help us to ensure that this suspension is lifted, because we think it really is adversely affecting us in an unjustified way. Thank you.
Senegal, I've been advised by the Secretariat that that item will be discussed under the review of significant trade, which is later today. So if you could remember your comment and raise it there, you will get an answer to your question. Thank you. I have Senegal. Oh, they've gone off now. Senegal.
Oui, nous sommes d'accord. Merci.
Thank you, Madam. We would take the point.
I will open the floor to observer organizations. I have IUCN.
Thank you, Chair. The IUCN supports the Secretariat's proposal to retain the recommendations in paragraphs 12, C, D, F, G, and I of document 71.1 for consideration by the Standing Committee after production of the Seahorse Illegal Trade Report, called for in Decision 19.228. These recommendations will help strengthen CITES implementation and enforcement for the millions of dried seahorses that find their way into international trade each year, which are primarily landed in non-selective fisheries and traded illegally. The IUCN also supports Australia's suggestion to include the recommendations in those paragraphs of document 71.1 in draft decision 20.BB of document 71.2. This will ensure these important recommendations get considered by the SC in the next intersessional period. Thank you.
Thank you. So give me a minute to consult with the Secretariat, and I'll sort of sum up where we are. So I'm looking to the Standing Committee perhaps for a little more discussion in that the Animals Committee is proposing that the one decision can be deleted, but when we look into the Secretariat's document in 71.2, there's a discrepancy. And so I'm looking for, are we actually going to delete decision 19.31, renew. I'm looking for, are we renewing decision 19.31? And then the other discussion I've captured, but I guess I'm looking a little more clarity on the renewal of decision 19.231.
It's 19.229. The Animals Committee say they just want to renew it, but in the other document it's revised.
Okay, my apologies. Basically document 71.1 says that they would like to renew decision 19.229, and then in document 71.2, the Secretariat revises that decision. So I'm looking for, do we go with just a renewal, or do we accept the proposed revised decision put forward by the Secretariat? I would like to give the floor to the Chair of the Animals Committee to find a solution here. Thank you.
Chair, I think we can make that easy. We would agree with the amended decision as proposed by the Secretariat, which makes sense in our view. Thank you.
Hopefully I'll get this right. My summary would be that the Animals Committee agrees to all the decisions in the annex. The Standing Committee. Okay, I'll try again. On seahorses, the Standing Committee agrees to all the decisions in Annex 71.1, and the Standing Committee agrees to the decisions in document 71.2 as amended by Australia. Do I have nodding heads? Okay, I got that right. And then Standing Committee agrees that decisions 19.28 and 19.232 can be proposed for deletion, and decision 19.231. And then Standing Committee agrees that decision 19.229 as revised can be put forward for COP20. I've got nodding heads. Okay, then we can conclude seahorses. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 25, the CITES Global Youth Network, document 25. And I call on Denmark to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Matthias, and I was one of the youth who participated in the CITES Youth Leadership Program. Today, on behalf of Denmark and the other co-proponents, I will be introducing SC 78, Document 25. The CITES Global Youth Network aims to serve as an important mechanism for global youth engagement efforts relating to CITES and sustainable wildlife trade. At SC 77, the Standing Committee endorsed Singapore's efforts in establishing the CITES Global Youth Network, in implementation of Resolution Conf 17.5 Rep COP 18 on youth engagement. This document reports on the progress since then. In April 2024, the CITES Youth Leadership Program, hosted by Singapore, saw the attendance of 41 youth nominated by CITES parties and observer organizations, representing 31 countries from all 6 CITES regions, including myself from Denmark. The 41 youth who attended this youth leadership program did not only bring the passion for biodiversity conservation, they also brought their expertise as veterinarians, rangers, researchers, CITES administrators, biologists, and expertise from many other fields. Each participating youth represented their country and brought with them insight into the challenges each CITES region faces when it comes to biodiversity conservation. Since the conclusion of the CITES Youth Leadership Program, the attending youth have worked tirelessly on creating a solid foundation for the network. Moreover, the youth have learned from each other, working together on governance, capacity building, communication, research and innovation, and networking and collaboration. Together, as founding members of the network, we envision future initiatives and in collaboration drafted the network's vision and mission, including in Annex 1 of the present document. Founding members will organize the inaugural CITES Global Youth Summit later in May this year, hosted by Singapore. The outcome of this youth summit and other significant milestones achieved by the network will be reported at COP20. In light of these positive developments on youth engagement, the co-proponents of this document intend to propose amendments to Resolution Conf 17.5 Rep COP 18 at the upcoming COP. An early draft of the proposed amendment is included in Annex 2 of the present document for consideration. The Standing Committee is invited to review the recommendations outlined in paragraph 9 of the present document. Thank you.
I would also like to call upon Singapore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Singapore had the honor of hosting and supporting the CITES Youth Leadership Program in April last year. This event kick-started the establishment of the CITES Global Youth Network, or CGYN. This was made possible by generous support from various sponsors, including the Government of Switzerland. Singapore will be hosting the CITES Global Youth Summit in May this year to provide a platform for collaboration among global youth leaders. This initiative seeks to nurture future leaders in safeguarding biodiversity and promoting conservation through sustainable wildlife trade. In support of this youth network, Singapore has pledged a financial contribution of 100,000 Singapore dollars to the CITES Secretariat. The CGYN is a crucial step towards engaging our future leaders, but its success depends on our collective support. We strongly encourage parties and observer organizations to join us in supporting the network. We seek the support of the parties and observer organizations to nominate affiliated youth for the Global Youth Summit in 2025, to continue to grow the network and equip youths with the necessary expertise in safeguarding our planet's diversity. Following this event, we hope that the participating youths from the CGYN will form their regional networks, and we encourage the support and sponsorship of parties to champion these nascent youth networks in their respective regions. We anticipate that going forward, the regional youth networks will contribute valuable insights to the CGYN. Singapore will continue to support our youth network and welcome the participation of youth through CGYN. We hope this will be a starting model for other regional youth network activities. We will continue to provide progress updates at the Standing Committee meetings. Thank you.
So I would like to open up discussion now on the recommendations contained in paragraph 9, and I call first on the Standing Committee members. I have Kuwait.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of Asia region, we would like to support the CITES Global Youth Network and congratulate Singapore for their efforts, recognizing its role in empowering youth, encouraging global collaboration, and strengthening effort in wildlife conservation and sustainable trade. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I call on Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. Switzerland congratulates Singapore and participating parties on the development of the CITES Global Youth Network. We truly believe that building knowledge of CITES-related issues within the next generation is crucial, because it is they who will carry CITES into our future. Switzerland supports the recommendations in this document. Thank you.
I call on Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We welcome the document and the development of the vision and mission of the CITES Global Youth Network. We congratulate the involved parties and youth, and first and foremost also Singapore, for the work done and the progress made. We stress the importance of ensuring that young people understand and contribute to the work under CITES to ensure its long-lasting impacts over generations. Regarding the recommendations, we agree with and support A, B, and C. As for recommendation D on the annex, we generally support, and we note that the leadership structure of the CITES Global Youth Network is still under development, and we appreciate that this is seen as a starting model for other networks, and we appreciate Singapore to provide updates for the next standing committee. Additionally, we have some small textual changes for clarity and ensure effectiveness. In paragraph 2 and 5, we would replace encourage with invite, as it is more appropriate and less prescriptive. And in paragraph 2 and 4, we would replace when practical and where practical with where feasible and when feasible, as it is more of a phrase that is used standard. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the DRC.
Thank you. On behalf of Central African region, we congratulate Singapore and the parties for drawing up and setting up the CITES Global Youth Network. This allows young people to participate in an inclusive and transparent process in terms of decisions for sustainable management of natural resources. The sub-region encourages the Secretariat to put into place mechanisms that will increase this participation and open it to as many as possible in the country so that they can participate in the Global Youth Summit. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I will open it up to observer parties, and I have the UAE. I have the UAE.
Thank you, Chair. The UAE commends the efforts of Singapore and co-proponents in strengthening the youth engagement under CITES. We recognize the critical roles that young professionals play in the future of wildlife conservation and sustainable trade. The UAE supports the recommendation in the document as they provide structural framework for empowering youth through capacity building, mentorship, and active participation in CITES processes. We welcome the establishment of CITES Global Youth Network and encourage broader collaboration to ensure that youth engagement translates into tangible conservation outcomes. Thank you.
I have the USA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States would like to note for the record that we are under a new administration. We're not able to take a position on this matter at this time. This is without prejudice to our ability to express positions on this matter in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I have several parties now wishing to speak, so Gabon.
Merci. Thank you, Madam Chair. We support Singapore's efforts and also those of the parties that have participated in setting up the CITES Global Youth Network. We believe that the setting up of mechanisms which allow the participation of our youth are essential. Thank you.
I know this is a very important matter. I also am cognizant of the time, so I would ask you to make your comments specifically on the proposed amendments to the resolution and alignment with previous speakers. And I know we all thank the youth for their engagement. So if we could not repeat that, but really stick to the substantive edits here, I will call on India.
Thank you, Chair. We wish to appreciate the initiative of Singapore for its efforts in establishing the CITES Global Youth Summit. Accordingly, we support the recommendations at para 9 of document 25. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I'll try to call on parties so I can get a sense of regions. I have South Africa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. South Africa would like to support the recommendation as highlighted in document S78 Doc 25, paragraph 9 in the present document. And we also like to align ourselves with the amendments that were stipulated by Belgium. Thank you.
So I'll read out the list of the countries that still wish to speak, and if you're wanting to speak to just support, we can note that by my reading out your names. If you have anything else that you would like to add that is not related to the support of the recommendations, then I will call upon you. So I have Thailand, China, Senegal, Mexico, Dominican Republic. If those are all about support, then you can unpress your button and it will be noted in the record. I also have Sudan. Okay, Senegal is still, and Zimbabwe, Zambia, Kenya. I'm taking this as support. If you have something else to speak on now, press your button on if it's something else. Malaysia for support. All right, then I've got Benin. One last time, those wishing to just have noted in the record their support for the recommendations, press your button. Otherwise, I will now turn. I've got Ghana, Qatar, Madagascar, Malaysia, Mali. Okay. Malaysia, are you wishing to speak on something else? I see you still have your button, so. No. Mali, are you wishing to speak on something else? No. All right. Observer organizations. I have the South African Sustainable Use and Conservation. SUCO, South Africa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With great appreciation to Singapore's efforts in driving this initiative. Our comment would be in Chapter 9. We have one concern, and we may be a bit misguided in our concern, but we feel that there isn't a strong statement ratifying the formation of the Global Youth Network. And we would hopefully suggest that it is recommended to the 20th Conference of the Parties that it formally ratifies the formation and existence of the CITES Global Youth Network, which would then unlock the access for the CGYN to the benefits and opportunities available through CITES structures and programs such as the Sponsored Delegates Project and others, which I think is we're not at that point yet, and I would suggest the Standing Committee consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. If no one else is requesting, I will sort of sum up to the Standing Committee where I think we are. I have heard strong support for the recommendations in paragraph 9, A, B, and C, and essentially the Standing Committee would agree to the proposed amendments to Resolution Comp 17.5 on youth engagement and Annex 2 as with the amendment by Belgium. and invite Singapore to take them into consideration when they submit the document to COP20. And with that, I conclude this item. Move on to the next agenda item, document 26, the CITES Gender Action Plan, decision 19.52, and I turn to the Secretariat to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair. This document provides an update on the development of the CITES Gender Action Plan, summarizing some of the background work on gender-related policies of other MEAs, and inputs received from parties and stakeholders in response to 2 notifications to the parties. The document highlights key proposed revisions to the draft outline, including considerations for demand reduction efforts, cultural relevance, and the inclusion of reference to organizations promoting Indigenous women's participation. The progress has been slower than expected due to the limited financial and human resources of the Secretariat. The Standing Committee is therefore invited to review the revised draft outline of the action plan, noting this as a work in progress, and consider maintaining and updating the current decisions to facilitate the finalization and implementation of the Gender Action Plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I now turn to the Standing Committee to open discussion on the recommendations in paragraph 9, looking for comments on the draft outline or the draft decisions. I have Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indonesia views that the proposed gender action plan contained phrase women and girls in all their diversity is a concept that is still not acceptable universally, does not align with the socio-cultural values in many UN member states, and most importantly has no consensus definition among countries. Indonesia would like to propose the exclusion of in all their diversity from the entire CITES proposal documents. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We welcome the update on the development of the CITES Gender Action Plan. Regarding the recommendations, on recommendation A, we agree with the proposed edits outlined in paragraph 6 of the document, specifically points A, B, D, and E. However, regarding C and the addition of cultural relevance, that requires a bit more clarification on the intended meaning, and especially we see in the Annex 2 that it's been used 2 times, but the second time under monitoring and evaluation on the gender-specific indicators, we wonder if it would not be better suited and feasible to say culturally informed instead. When it comes to the implementation. Regarding the proposed objective under point 3, objectives of the action plan, the last bullet point, share information about gender-based violence in wild flora and fauna international trade change. We do request some clarification on how this objective would be operationalized and what measures would be taken to ensure that it does not impose an undue burden on parties and on the Secretariat. Regarding recommendation B, we agree and support to maintain the decisions 1951 and 53 and revise the decision 52. We look forward to the draft plan to review it in detail. Thank you.
Thank you. I open the floor also to observer parties. I have the Russian Federation.
Thank
Thank you, Madam. We would like to draw your attention that the revised draft outline of the CITES Gender Action Plan and the draft decisions on CITES Gender Action Plan contain terms and concepts that are not considered universally agreed and are alien to a significant number of countries. In other fora in the past, their inclusion resulted in voting on international documents or disassociation from relevant provisions. In the draft outline, we request the following edits. In the rationale, the first and the second bullets should read the role of women and girls. Further throughout the document, we suggest similar replacements to speak about the role of women or the role of women and men rather than the role of gender. Like Indonesia, we reject the use of the term in all their diversity and would not subscribe to a document that contains it. The terms gender-blind approaches and gender-aware strategies are unclear. Instead, we could use challenges of approaches that do not take into account a gender perspective and opportunities for strategies that address the specific needs of women and girls for the implementation of CITES. Data collection broken down by gender should be replaced with data collection disaggregated by sex, in line with the terminology of the United Nations Statistical Commission. In the draft decision 1951A and E, we disagree with the term all genders. That is not enshrined in intergovernmental documents and call for its deletion, so that the bullet A would read, consider the needs of indigenous and local peoples, especially women and girls. The same concerns in all their diversity is in bullet B. We emphasize the importance of adhering to the core mandate of the Convention rather than diving into the realm that is outside of the scope and running the risk of using concepts that belong in other fora and may not enjoy consensus in the end. I will send this statement to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Oceania region would like to align itself with the comments by Belgium. Thank you.
Call on the USA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking as the United States, as with our last intervention, the United States would like to note for the record, we are unable to take a position on this agenda item at this time.
Thank you. I have Israel.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to echo the position of Russia, as it was mentioned. We would also like to note in the comments, responses to the parties, Japan suggested that the plan should be implemented outside the core budget of the Secretariat, and we would like to also remind the Secretariat of that and make sure that is how it is carried out. Thank you.
Conscious again of time, I have two standing committee members still wishing to speak, and then I will basically read out the parties that want to speak. And since this is a document that is still subject to feedback that the Secretariat wants to take into account, I will ask the parties that are on the request list to provide that feedback to the Secretariat for their consideration rather than reading it out here. Because time is getting shorter. So I turn to the UK as a standing committee member.
Thank you, Chair. The UK support the position of Belgium and New Zealand. Thank you.
And if you can align yourself with something you've already heard, that would make this go quicker. Honduras.
Thank you. Honduras shares the opinions expressed by Russia and Israel.
And so the parties that I have that are wishing, I have one more standing committee member, Kuwait.
Thank you, Chair. We align our position with Russia. Thank you.
And so the parties that I have wishing to speak, Argentina, Iran, Gabon, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Australia, I would ask that rather than speaking here, you provide your comments to the Secretariat for their consideration. I hope that's an acceptable way forward. I'm just cognizant of the time this might take, and given that this document is still subject to revision and feedback, it's probably good that we proceed this way. I see. All right, I will call on Iran because I know they've asked several times on some other items, so I will call on Iran, but ask you to be brief.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just I would like to echo the position of Russia and Indonesia as a short comment. Thank you.
And I have Gabon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gabon welcomes the initiatives undertaken by the Secretariat and the chair of the Standing Committee to having taken into account the point of equality amongst genders. And on the matter of gender, we would encourage all initiatives undertaken by parties to participate in this work. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now open the floor to observer organizations, and if you can sort of, I'm getting a sense that there is the amendments proposed by Belgium, and then there's the amendments proposed by Russian Federation and Israel. So if you can align yourself or add something else, I have World Wildlife Fund.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Briefly, WWF and Traffic align ourselves with the comments of Belgium, and we take this opportunity to call on parties and other donor organisations to contribute funds towards the plan. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other observer organization? Not seeing any requests, I'll consult with the Secretariat and try to I have Mexico. I will take this as the last intervention.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to align ourselves with the proposal from New Zealand and make an alternative drafting proposal, and I'll read it in English.
Persons without discrimination of any kind, including in the basis of gender. Gracias.
All these parties.
All the parties that have comments, and Mexico, what you just read, if you can provide those in writing to the Secretariat, would be greatly appreciated. I see that Saudi Arabia and Argentina still wish to speak, but I'm trying to sum this up. If you can be very brief and just align yourself, it'll give us a better sense, but you do have the opportunity to send comments to the Secretariat. So, Saudi Arabia.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll be short. We would like to align ourselves with the intervention made by Kuwait, Russia, and Indonesia. Thank you so much.
I'm seeing more speakers wanting to speak. Please, I think at this point I will stop interventions in the essence of time and the rest of our agenda, and you have the opportunity to provide your comments in writing, whatever intervention you were going to read, to the Secretariat, so I ask you to please do that. And I will now consult with the Secretariat and try to sum up this agenda item. this is where I'm sort of summarizing right now, and I look to the Standing Committee for their guidance. The Standing Committee notes the outline contained in Annex 2 to Document 78, Document 26, as well as all the inputs received and made at this present meeting. Where I still need some clarity is whether there were any changes proposed to the actual decisions 19.52 as contained in the Annex 4. So if the Standing Committee members have any edits to the decision 19.52 in Annex 4, I'm looking for clarity on that. Belgium.
Yes, sorry, apologize, Chair. The changes to the text would be in point 5, monitoring and evaluation, to change with cultural relevance to the development of culturally informed, gender-specific indicators. And the rest was just to take into the account of the Secretariat in the development of. Thank you.
Can you repeat that one more time, Belgium? Okay, Belgium, I understand you're commenting on the outline and not the draft decision. I'm looking for any comments on the draft decision. My understanding is we are renewing decisions 19.51 and 19.53, and we are proposing the revision to decision 19.52 as contained in the annex. And I wasn't clear from the discussions. I've heard many comments on the outline, but I wasn't clear on if we were changing anything on the decision itself. So I wanted to give you one more opportunity. But not seeing any, I would say that the Standing Committee proposes to the Conference of the Parties at its 20th meeting to maintain decisions 19.51 and 19.53 and revise decision 19.52 as contained in Annex 4 to the document SC 78, document 26. Do I have concurrence on that? I see smiles and nodding heads. Okay, thank you. Then I'll conclude this one. And we will now move to document 27, engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities, decision 17.57, Rev Cup 19, and decision 18.31, Rev Cup 19, and I turn to the chair of that working group, Canada, to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair. I am pleased to report on the progress made by the Working Group on Engagement of Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities. SC 78 Doc 27 presents a summary of the discussion as well as the Working Group's recommendation in line with its mandate. Key highlights from the report are as follows. I prepared and revised non-binding guidance on consulting Indigenous peoples and local communities on proposals to amend the appendices in line with the mandate, based on the comments from the working group. This document is found in the annex to the present document for review and approval by the Standing Committee. Regarding the engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities in CITES processes, the working group discussed ideas for engagement at the national and international levels. While the working group discussed a number of ideas for engagement at the national level, there was less agreement on possible approaches to engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities at the international level. A wide and diverse range of views were expressed, for which I sought to focus on those that seem to have a majority acceptance as a way forward. The Standing Committee is invited to consider the ideas outlined in paragraph 10 and 11 of the report and consider submitting a decision to consider whether to incorporate the ideas for national engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities proposed in this report into Resolution Conf 16.6 in a manner that avoids duplication. Regarding the list of ideas of engagement at the international level, the Standing Committee is invited to adopt a decision to further explore the merits and drawbacks of the ideas presented in paragraph 15 of this document and make recommendations to COP21. Finally, the working group examined terminology used in different CITES resolutions and decisions when referring to Indigenous peoples, local communities, or rural communities. The working group generally agreed that a consistent approach to terminology would be preferable. The formulation, Indigenous peoples, and local communities, receives the most support. Recommendations to the Standing Committee as a result of the working group's wide-ranging discussions are found in paragraph 19 for the committee's consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for the work of the working group. I now open up the document to the Standing Committee members for discussion. We're looking at the recommendations contained in paragraph 19. I have Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This intervention is on behalf of Brazil, Peru, and Panama. We welcome the work undertaken by the working group and is in favor of non-binding guidance. However, we are not in favor on the exercise of standardization of the terminology. First, because CITES is not the most appropriate place to discuss IPLCs in general terms. This is a subject that can be discussed in CDB, which has indigenous and local community in its texts. And also there are a number of decisions on that regard in CDB. The short form IPLCs is used and should be continued to be used here in CITES and other multilateral environment agreements. Secondly, we consider the proposition of standardization of a term exhaustively debated in previous meeting a grave precedent for other negotiation items. The most used terminology in many MEAs is indigenous peoples and local community without comma, as it is in the strategic vision objective 4.1 of CITES, which was carefully negotiated among ourselves. The idea of changing many decisions and documents produced by CITES is, in our view, downplays all the effort undertook by negotiators in the past. In Brazil, indigenous peoples and traditional communities, as we call, are normally vulnerable people, which deserve special attention and should not be separated in silos. We believe that we should not separate people, not even with a comma. CITES should not establish precedents to other multilateral environmental agreements or reduce the language regarding IPLCs, since it does not have the mandate to do it. Thus, we request deletion of paragraph B. Thank you.
I have New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Oceania welcomes this report. On recommendation 19A concerning terminology, Oceania supports the approach of inserting a comma before the "and" to differentiate between Indigenous peoples and local communities. In Oceania, Indigenous peoples are not generally equated to local or rural communities. We suggest linking recommendations A and B so that the Secretariat in 19B considers the terminology decided by the Standing Committee under 19A as it carries out its review of terminology in resolutions and decisions and proposes changes to standardise this text. We support the excellent non-binding guidance on engagement with Indigenous peoples and local communities in the annex to the report, and the associated decisions 20AA and 20BB. And we support, 20AAA and 20BBA, I think. And we support proposed decision 20BBB, directing the Standing Committee to consider whether to incorporate the ideas for national engagement into Resolution Conf 16.6 with COP18. On engagement at the international level, we support decision 20BBC, directing further consideration by the Standing Committee of the ideas set out at paragraph 15 of the report, including F. However, we propose the use of more descriptive language by changing the wording from, quote, further explore the merits and drawbacks, quote, to, quote, identify the opportunities and limitations, quote. Thank you. With your indulgence, Chair, New Zealand will invite the representative from Ngā Iwi o Taranaki Collective to speak briefly to recommendation 15F on the challenges of travelling with items made from CITES listed specimens. Thank you.
Thank you, and please speak. Welcome.
Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā Iwi o Taranaki is a collective of 8 Indigenous Māori peoples from the region of Taranaki in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is our 4th CITES Forum attendance, COP19, the IPLC Working Group in Peru, a previous Standing Committee meeting also. We'd like to acknowledge the members of the IPLC Working Group, and particularly Canada, for expertly leading this work stream. Our particular concern is that CITES heavily impedes centuries-old intercultural Māori and wider oceanic traditions around the creation, transport and gifting of taonga, our sacred cultural items. We support New Zealand's comments on behalf of Oceania and have our own views on all the recommendations, but as mentioned, we'll particularly reference recommendation 15F. We strongly support the simplification of procedures for the international movement of cultural items, especially as precedent has already been set in relation to the cross-border movement of musical instruments. At this particular meeting, I also represent Toi Aotearoa Creative New Zealand, our government's arts funding agency, which recently led our national artistic delegation at the 13th Pacific Festival of Arts and Culture in June last year in Hawaii. Stringent CITES regulations significantly impeded the full and authentic inclusion of cultural items for ceremonial use, for artistic expression and personal adornment for many of the nearly 30 oceanic countries in attendance, including Aotearoa, New Zealand. This strongly reinforced for us the need for resolution to this issue. We openly invite direct dialogue with us to better understand our perspective and look forward to the removal of barriers to Indigenous peoples' participation in these fora for the wider benefit of CITES work. Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence. Mauri ora.
Thank you. I call on DRC.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking for Central Africa, we would like to congratulate Canada for this document. We consider it to be of great importance. Indigenous peoples are stakeholders when it comes to the management of our local resources in the Congo River Basin, and they therefore are significant to policy in our region. With respect to participation, we think that we need to think about the ad hoc mechanisms that do allow Indigenous people to participate in activities in order to ensure that CITES measures do not become more complicated. We could have a certain amount of capacity building, for instance, which we might not be able to fund or have the resources for. That is why the Central African sub-region would suggest that this be put to COP COP20 so that we can consider this document carefully in order to ensure that we are in a position to see what parties already have in place with respect to these sorts of activities. We would like to say that we support the Brazil proposal with the way in which we talk about indigenous peoples and local communities, because the Brazil proposal is entirely in keeping with our legislation as states parties in the Central African sub-region. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I call on Honduras.
Hablo en nombre de Centro.
I'm speaking on behalf of the Central American region. We agree with Brazil and Oceania. We have the same sorts of problems with musical instruments. Thank you, Madam.
I call on Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We support and highlight the need to maintain the consensus reached in the intersessional working group on the engagement of indigenous people and local communities. We believe that progress in engaging indigenous peoples and local communities is beneficial to CITES. However, Indonesia would like to align with Brazil in suggesting removing the comma before local communities in the document so that the phrase reads indigenous peoples and local communities to ensure consistency with other multilateral agreements. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I call on Kenya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Kenya want to appreciate the chair of the intersessional working group. And we participated in the working group. We also want to bring to the standing committee the information document that have been submitted by Senegal and Liberia that proposed amendments to the guidance to the working group and now is included in the annex to the information document. Madam Chair, we agreed that the non-binding guidance is not ready to be submitted for approval at COP20. We rather that the Secretariat should post it on the CITES website as a draft for information and comment, and also support the edit proposed in paragraph 19C of document 28, inviting the Standing Committee edits to paragraph 19D, inviting parties to take note of the draft guidance and share their views. Madam Chair, indigenous peoples and local community is important, and we consider that their engagement on CITES matters should be strengthened at the national level. But at the international level, the current provision for engagement as observers are adequate. We want to support the proposal by Brazil to include a comma after the indigenous people and community, and also the deletion of 20BB as was proposed. I thank you.
Thank you. I call on Poland.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We welcome the report and the non-binding guidance. In general, we support the recommendations under point B, C, D, and E. We consider the engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities as an important issue, and we would like to emphasize that the most effective and meaningful engagement can be best achieved at the national level. We note that the engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities at the international level is regarded as relevant, and we think that ideas proposed in the document, it's a good basis for further considerations and discussions. It needs, however, be noted that each convention must take into account its own distinct mandate and framework when looking for ways to improve engagement. That is why we should carefully consider how processes from other agreements, such as CBD, align with the unique context of CITES. And Madam Chair, as for recommendation A, If the committee not reach consensus on this issue, we would propose to postpone this discussion on this terminology issue to COP20. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I open the floor now to observer parties. We've heard many views. If you can possibly say where you fall on those views to try to be brief. So I have Canada.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is made on behalf of Mexico and Canada. Canada and Mexico strongly support efforts to enhance the participation of Indigenous peoples as well as local community in this convention. The non-binding guidance developed by the working group to help facilitate consultation with Indigenous people and local communities on proposals is, in our view, a key tool to increase meaningful engagement. As such, we strongly support the recommendation to put this document forward for adoption at COP20. We wish to stress that Indigenous peoples are not stakeholders. The United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples affirm that Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. As such, regarding the terminology, Canada and Mexico strongly support the recommendation of the working group to standardize the terminology used in CITES. We recommend using the formulation Indigenous peoples, capitalized, comma, as well as local communities. This will ensure that the rights of Indigenous people under the UN Declaration are upheld. Furthermore, we agree that the list of ideas presented in the report for engagement at the national and international level have the potential to significantly help tackle some of the barriers that hinder the participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities in CITES. We support the recommendation to incorporate the ideas for national engagement in Resolution 16.6. And in this respect, we wish to amend the paragraph B of draft decision of the COP directed to the Standing Committee to specify that the Standing Committee should incorporate the list of ideas in Resolution 16.6 instead of considering whether and how to incorporate them. We also recommend editing the paragraph to indicate that additional ideas should be considered as appropriate. I could read the paragraph if you wish. And finally, for Canada and Mexico, the participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities in decision-making processes on wildlife trade at the international level is equally important. We therefore support continuing to explore the ideas for engagement at the international to complement national engagement. Thank you. And if you'd like me to read our proposal, we'd be happy to do so. Thank you.
I'll come back to you if we have a need for that because you're out of time. I will now call on, I've got another standing committee member, USA.
Thank you. This is on behalf of the United States as an observer party. As with our last intervention, the United States would like to note for the record that we are unable to take a position on this agenda item at this time. Thank you.
I have Japan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For recommendation A, we support Brazil, DRC, Honduras, Indonesia, and Poland, the word indigenous peoples and local communities with no comma. That is the widely used and well-established way in the international fora, including UN General Assembly resolutions. Other MAAs are using the same wording with no comma. So, for this reason, we believe we should keep the well-established international practice, no comma. Thank you.
I have Argentina.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Argentina would like to thank Canada for having presented this document. we would note that this document should include explicit recognition of the role and contribution of science and to data-based evidence and the best use of information available to indigenous peoples, and we should ensure that they are able to enjoy the benefits of that kind of data. In Annex 27, with respect to the annex, we would suggest that at the end of the paragraph beginning respectful,
honors and respect any traditional knowledge being shared and enable that knowledge to inform decision-making, agregar,
we would like to add,
with science and evidence-based approaches. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I call on the Central African Republic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to take this opportunity to support the statement made by the representative of the Central African Group. Indigenous peoples and local communities, as far as we're concerned, are dealt with in our legislation without any commas or separation. We, the Central African Republic, would like to see the comma deleted, this in keeping with our national law. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have two other standing committee members. Israel.
Thank you, Chair. We would first like to emphasize that our comments do not mean to belittle the importance of Indigenous people and local communities, but we do think that this is largely outside the mandate of CITES and that too much resources of the Secretariat and the Standing Committee are being engaged in this issue. For this reason, we have a lot of problems with the decision 20BB, and it does propose quite a bit of work to the Standing Committee and to the Secretariat. We would remind parties that these are talking about non-binding guidance, which is fine, and therefore in 20BB, the only subparagraph that we would consider to keep is A, and we would propose deletion of the rest of that draft decision. As we said in the beginning, we don't mean to belittle the role of non-Indigenous peoples and local communities. We just feel that this should not be at this level of engagement in CITES. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Kuwait.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to align our position with Indonesia, Japan, Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you. I have China.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China is the member of the Intersessional Working Group. We really appreciate Canada, the leadership in as a chair of the Intersessional Working Group. We really support the consensus reached in the working group and accept the terminology spoken by the other countries. We don't support using the comma between indigenous people and the local community, which separated the people in the CITES group. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I call on Australia.
Thank you, Chair. Australia shares a lot of the views that were expressed earlier by Canada. We wish to express our support for the terminology proposed in the working group report. In our view, the proposal respects the rights and contributions of Indigenous peoples to CITES while also recognising the distinct and unique contribution of local communities. And we also note that it is consistent with the approach requested by the United Nations expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples, which was submitted to our last Standing Committee meeting as an INF document, so colleagues can find that at SC 77 INF Doc 10 if they'd like to take a look. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I call on South Africa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. South Africa would like to support the recommendations of the working group. Thank you.
I have another DRC. You're asking to speak again. I'll call on you, but please be brief.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. I'm speaking on behalf of the DRC to come back to this comma question. For the DRC, there is no need for such a comma because Indigenous peoples and local communities live together. They are already bound, and we have legislation that involves them in activities, particularly forest-based activities, and there is no dissociation of Indigenous peoples on the one hand and local communities on the other, so no need for the comma.
Thank you. I'm going to pause here for a minute to consult with the Secretariat. I have 4 parties still wishing to speak. I will keep those, but then close the list. So I'll call on Najir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to thank the working group for having drafted this report. We will be brief. We support the amendments proposed to 20AA and 20BB in the INF Doc 41 proposed by Liberia and Senegal, as mentioned by Kenya. Thank you, Madam.
I have Gabon.
Thank you, Madam. Gabon participated actively in the intersessional working group on the participation of the engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities. We would like to thank Canada for having prepared document 27 and congratulate the chair on an excellent job. We would agree with the Central African sub-region as well as Kenya, Brazil, the Central African Republic, the DRC, and we would like to congratulate Senegal on having prepared INF document 41, and we entirely subscribe to those comments. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I know I still have 4 parties to speak, but that's another 8 minutes. I think we've heard quite a lot of views, so basically I am going to close the speaker list now. All right, I think this is where we are. I think we've heard from almost all the standing committee members on this particular item, and we've had extensive discussion by parties. Oh, I realize we haven't heard from observer organizations, so I will, before I sum up, I guess take 2 interventions from observer organizations, and I've got many asking to speak. I will try to choose. I will take traffic, and I will take IWMC.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is on behalf of Traffic and PIUCN, who actively participated in the intersessional working group on this agenda item, and commend the tremendous efforts and dedication of the chairs in advancing this group's work despite the diverse perspectives among its members. Traffic and IUCN support the recommendations presented to the Standing Committee under this agenda item. However, regarding paragraph B of draft decision 20BB, which proposes considering whether and how to incorporate the ideas on engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities at the national level into Resolution Conf 16.6 on CITES and livelihoods in a manner that avoids duplication, we emphasize the importance of not only avoiding duplication, but also ensuring that such ideas are easily accessible. We suggest, for example, centralizing this information on the CITES website in a dedicated subsection on engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities in the topic section to highlight its importance and facilitate access for parties. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, and I call on IWMC.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Non-binding measures and a reliance on volunteering funding address uneven implementation and marginalize IPLCs in resource-limited areas. We urge CITES to adopt binding obligations and sustainable fundings so IPLCs can actively shape policy and practice. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will now try to summarize where I believe we are. My intention is I would like to ask one on the non-binding guidance based on what I've heard from standing committee members. Are we ready to send that non-binding guidance to the COP, to COP20, with the amendment proposed by Argentina? I'm looking UK.
Thank you, Chair. We also have some minor textual amendments to the non-binding guidance, specifically in the objective section to remove some duplicative language, and to the second bullet point within the guiding principles of consultation. Our changes aim to better align with the language from Article 19 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and we can submit those to you directly in writing.
Thank you. Let me go back to this, consult with the Secretariat quickly. We've had extensive debate on that and on this topic. I know how important it is. And also that, my apologies that I couldn't call on every party who wished to speak, but I think we got a sense. My recommendation is to create a small drafting group of standing committee members. My opening remarks, I asked standing committee members to consult within their region. This is one where I'd like this drafting group just to be the standing committee members, and if you can have consultations with members in your region, but I really would like to keep this small so we can get this done. We're running out of time. And so what I would like to send to that small drafting group would focus on the decisions 20AA and 20BB, and also whether the guidance can be forwarded, since there are some amendments being proposed, to the COP for a decision. So I'm sending that suite of items to the small drafting group. That means I've been counseled, that means I'm sending A, B, C, and D, all the recommendations to this small drafting group to work on. And I would like to ask Canada to co-chair that working group again. I see them nodding, so it will be co-chaired by Canada. So I'm looking for membership among the standing committee members for this group. I have Brazil, Kenya, Kuwait, New Zealand, Poland, Indonesia, UK, Japan, Brazil would like to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We agree with the idea of creating this drafting group. Of course, Brazil wants to participate, but we think that we have heard a lot of support to our intervention with regard to remove the comma, and our proposition is just to delete recommendation B, and we've heard a lot of support from the standing committee and also from observer members, and we think that we don't need to bring that aspect to the drafting group. We think that it's already have a lot of support, and we don't think that we need to do it in the drafting group. Thank you very much.
I guess I sort of heard that it was split, but I will look to the standing committee to give me some insight on what Brazil has suggested, which is the deletion of B and accepting the terminology without the comma. Am I correct on that? I've got Kenya and followed by Kuwait. We'll have this discussion here again. Kenya.
Madam Chair, Kenya is with the same view with Brazil, that there was no comments or doubts that the commas will be removed. That was sorted, and also the deletion of 20 BB.
All right, I will hear from standing committee members specifically on this issue of the terminology. So could you speak to that specifically? Perhaps there isn't a need to send that to the drafting group, and my apologies. I heard many interventions on this. Kuwait.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking for another subject. As China is more involved in this working group, so instead of Kuwait, I would nominate the alternate member of the standing committee to the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuwait. I'll check with the Secretariat on the rules of procedure if that's allowable. Okay, I have Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We align with Brazil on this, that we should delete the comma straightly. Thank you.
I have Poland.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. On contrary, we are not in favor of deleting the recommendation B, and yeah, I can only recall that if no consensus is reached, would suggest to defer the discussion to COP20.
Yeah, that's where I saw the split.
Yeah.
I have Madagascar asking to speak as a standing committee member, and they haven't spoken yet, so I'm keen to hear what Madagascar has to say.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We support the proposal from Brazil as well as the proposal from the African countries to remove and delete the comma between indigenous peoples and local communities. Thank you.
I think based on what I've heard from one standing committee member, Paula, I still feel there is not consensus in this room on removal of the comma. So I will ask the drafting committee to consider that as well. So it's all the decision, all the paragraphs A, B, C, and D, and come up with the sense of that drafting group, and basically we can see what we can send to the COP there for a decision. And I think the COP will have to probably decide on this comma, but I will give you a chance to discuss it, but I really think the focus will be on the decisions you send to the COP, which is from the standing committee. So with that, I create that small drafting group of standing committee members only. Oh, and we can agree to China basically as the alternate member representing the Asian region. Thank you. Brazil, you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So it's right, we can discuss this in the drafting group, even though I think we will just disagree in the drafting group. So I don't see much, a lot of reasoning for doing that, but that's fine. But I just have a matter of clarification. From where in COP decision we have the mandate to discuss terminology of IPLCs? I don't see where we have the mandate to do it, but this we can further discuss in the drafting group, and I don't see any decisions of COP referring that we should do this exercise, but we will further discuss in the drafting group. Thank you very much.
Okay, the Secretariat is advising me that if you look at decision 17.57 Rev COP 19, which is directed to the Standing Committee, it reads, the Standing Committee shall examine the terminology used in different resolutions and decisions when referring to Indigenous peoples, local communities of rural communities, and make recommendations to COP 20. So we do have that mandate. Japan and DRC, are you still asking to speak, or are you accepting the chair's way forward with this small standing committee drafting group? Japan, will you speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We support what was said by Brazil on this particular issue of comma. I don't think we can reach any conclusion even after the small group. Thank you.
All right, so if you don't reach consensus, you can just put it to the COP with a decision to decide on the terminology. I'd like to move on to the next agenda item. Okay, I call on the DRC.
Merci. Thank you, Madam Chair. It is just to support Brazil's proposal and also to recommend that as Central African region, we would like to participate in this working group. Thank you.
We will add DRC to represent the Central African Republic in the small drafting group of standing committee members. Now, and with that, I close this and we'll get back a report from the drafting group. Move on to document 28, livelihoods, and I call on the chair of the working group for that, Zambia, to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair. Zambia is speaking as one of the chairs of the Working Group on Livelihoods. As reported at SC 77, the working group has made some good progress with its two main tasks, namely, the review of the guidance on maximizing benefits to indigenous peoples and local communities from trade in CITES listed species, and the report on exploring the use of certification and labeling system for products of CITES listed species produced from communities. All working group members agreed in principle at the working group in-person meeting held in Peru in September 2023 to work on its mandate that the guidance is a valuable tool, and agreed on the 6 strategies as amended, and also recognize the merits of various options of the labeling systems, as well as the options that should be given priority. Madam Chair, I wish to state that no objection to this approach was heard at SC 77. However, during the intersessional work, some different and divergent points of view on the way forward were heard. The co-chairs have made their best efforts to find a middle ground to accommodate the different opinions. Thus, the proposed amendments to Resolution Conf 16.6 found in Annex 2 represent a minimum recognition of the 6 strategies that are not legally binding in nature as contained in the guidance, and further amended to reflect discussions after SC 77. The draft decisions in Annex 3 propose some initial work on the certification and labeling systems through the compilation of best practices and development of case studies as envisioned at the meeting in Peru. Madam Chair, I wish to stress that this work was called upon by the Resolution Conference 16.6. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the working group's report and work. I will now open discussion on the recommendations included in this document in paragraph 11 and invite discussion by the Standing Committee members. I have Poland.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We agree with recommendation A. As for the recommendation B, we support the 2 suggested deletions in Resolution Conf 16.6, Rev Cop 18 in Annex 2. We acknowledge that indigenous people and local communities depend on a wide array of wild animal and plant species for their livelihoods. We oppose the draft amendment to Resolution Conf 16.6, Rev Cop 18, that reads, noting the 6 strategies highlighted in the guidance on maximizing benefits to indigenous peoples and local communities from trade in CITES-listed species. It's paragraph 11 on page 6. We also oppose Annex 1. Neither the guidance nor the 6 strategies, original and amended version in Annex 1, should be referenced in Resolution Conf 16.6 Rev Cop 18. They go beyond the scope of CITES and advocate for the expansion of trade in endangered species. By noting the 6 strategies, they would receive acknowledgement within a resolution. Other elements are already covered by Resolution Conf 16.6 Rev Cop 18. As for the recommendation C, we agree with draft decision 20.AA with the following amendment in letter A. In the 3rd line of this letter A point, we suggest to cross out the words for both men and women and put all genders instead. So it reads, and benefit equitably all genders. We suggest it to remain coherent with accepted language, for example, in Resolution Conf 19.3 on gender and international trade in wild fauna and flora, and in Decision 19.51. Furthermore, we oppose draft decisions 20.BB and 20.CC. We believe that most tasks included in 20BB can be fulfilled at national level, including the implementation of case studies. This would be equally useful and effective while being more resource efficient towards the Secretariat. the outcomes and all information shared under draft decision 20AA, letter B, could be shared with other parties through information documents. And lastly, Madam Chair, we agree with recommendation D of the document. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Brazil completely agree with the recommendations as they are, without changes. We, of course, we respectfully disagree with the comment from Poland that many of those texts need to be done at the national level, because we need international assistance to make many of those actions. So we cannot do it alone. So that's why we can't agree that this all these tasks need to be done only at the national level. Of course, we will do actions in the national level, but we need to complement them with support of international community. Thank you very much.
Call on Madagascar.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would also like to congratulate the working group, and we support the document that is the outcome of that work. And Madagascar and the countries working with the Sustainable Wildlife Management Programme have some suggestions for additions to Annex 1 and Annex 2 of this document. And we would like to request, Madam Chair, if we should read out this now or send it to the working group.
I'll hold now and not ask you to read those changes. I think preferable would be to send it, so we'll wait. I have the UK.
Thank you, Chair. We support the views of Poland, but would be happy to keep the draft decisions 20BB and 20CC as a compromise. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Kuwait.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to support the statement made by Brazil. Kuwait recognizes the sixth strategy highlighted in the CITES guidance and support their inclusion in the resolution Conf 16.6 Rev COP 18 to maximize the benefit of the legal and sustainable trade. Thank you, Chair.
I will now open the floor to observer parties. I have Peru.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Peru, as co-chair of the working group on livelihoods, aligns itself with what we have heard from the delegation of Zambia. We welcome the important progress made in the working group to meet its mandate and the consensus reached at the face-to-face meeting in Peru in 2023. In terms of the guidance and the 6 programs. And this was important. When some divergences appeared, we as co-chairs made efforts to take into account the different opinions, and the proposals only take into account the 6 strategies which are not legally binding. And that's why we are surprised by the position of some countries and of not being aware at this point in the process of all the work that was carried out up to date. As this committee knows, this agenda item on livelihoods is very important for many developing countries in order to empower and make the most of the benefits for indigenous peoples and local communities with the effective implementation of CITES, and thus to support the eradication of poverty. In order to avoid greater debate in this committee, we suggest that the discussions take place within the framework of the working group over coming weeks. Thank you.
I call on the USA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking as the United States, as with our last intervention, the United States would like to note for the record we are unable to take a position on this agenda item at this time.
Thank you. Call on China.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China sincerely thanks co-chairs of the working group, Peru and Zambia. As a member of the intersessional working group, we actively participate in the discussion. China therefore proposed that 2 paragraphs in Annex 2 to the present document be revised so that they align with the consensus reached in the intersessional working group. The revisions are as following. First, using recognizing instead of noting in paragraph 11 on page 6 in Annex 2 to the document, which would then read, recognizing the 6 strategies highlighted in the guidance on maximizing benefits to indigenous peoples and the local communities from trade in CITES listed species. Second, insert a new paragraph on page 8 after 4 under regarding enabling policies in Annex 2 to the document, which would read 5. Invite parties to follow the 6 strategies highlighted in the guidance on maximizing the benefits to indigenous peoples and the local communities from trade in CITES listed species. Third, China further suggests adding the 6 strategies which are currently listed in Annex 1 of the present document as an Annex to Resolution Conf 16.6 Rev Corp 18 on CITES and livelihoods, as the 6 strategies is a great outcome of the intersessional working group in Peru meeting. I will submit these proposed suggestions to the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I call on Canada.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is made on behalf of Mexico and Canada regarding the guidance on maximizing benefits to Indigenous peoples and local community from trade in CITES listed species. We broadly support the amendment made by the working group on the strategy. However, we do have some amendments to ensure the alignment of the strategy with the mandate and scope of the convention. On paragraph 1, we recommend that the term both men and women be replaced with all gender for greater inclusivity as recommended by Poland. Regarding paragraph 2D, we suggest the deletion of the last part of the sentence as well as markets and price structure of value chain to ensure that this strategy remains within the scope of the convention. Finally, we also recommend the deletion of paragraph 3 and 4 in line with the rationale just expressed now. And considering that the strategy have been amended by the working group and are different than the one that are found in the guidance, we would recommend that the strategy be annexed to the resolution 16.6 Rev Cop 18, as opposed to simply referencing them in the resolution. Alternatively, they could be posted on the CITES website. And considering that the amendment proposed by the working group have brought a stronger focus on the livelihoods of Indigenous peoples as well as local community, specifically, we also believe that the title of the resolution should be amended to reflect this context. So we would recommend amending the title as follows: CITES and livelihoods of Indigenous peoples as well as local communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I have 9 parties now requesting to speak. I'd like to consult with the Secretariat because I think we're running out of time, so I may have a way forward. Okay, before I move forward, I'd like to go back to Madagascar. I would like to ask you, just for your changes to the draft decisions, not the actual resolution, but just focus on any changes, any amendments you would have to the decisions. 20AA, 20BB, 20CC.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The countries working on this have a proposal with respect to page 8 of the document.
Is not the draft decisions, that is the resolution. I am looking for, if you have it, because what I'm trying to see is, I haven't heard that many changes to the draft decisions, and so I'm trying to maybe wrap that part up, and I will send the resolution to a working group. So if you have any amendments to the draft decisions, I'd like to know what they are, because I've heard from Poland and the UK that there were some suggestions to the draft decisions.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have a proposed amendment which is addressed to the Secretariat. This on page 10 of the document. Our proposal is to collaborate with ASWM program to advance the implementation of the strategies on maximizing the benefits of indigenous peoples and local communities from trade in CITES-listed species in its operating countries, addressing both policy and legal frameworks, as well as field activities. That is our proposal with respect to the language directed to the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Madagascar, that was clear. So putting the resolution aside for a moment, I look to the Standing Committee to see if we can agree to accepting the draft decisions in the Annex 3 to this document and submit them to the consideration of the Conference of the Parties as amended by Madagascar, and in decision 20AA, we would remove the phrase "for both men and women" is what I heard. I know Poland has objected to decisions BB and CC, but basically they were the only ones I heard that objected to those decisions. So in which case, I'm looking if we can adopt decision 20AA with the amendments we've heard proposed, and 20BB and 20CC. So I look for Standing Committee feedback. I'm sorry, we're not adopting it. We agree to those decisions to be sent to the COP, who will make the final decision on adoption. So I have Brazil wishing to speak. And if it's on the decisions, please.
It's just a question of clarification, Madam Chair. So what exactly are the suggestions that we are incorporating to send to the COP? Because there was many members that suggested some points. And we are not sure if those suggestions are going to be incorporated or not. Thank you very much.
So my understanding is that decision 20AA, there was a compromise there on little paragraph A where we're removing "for both men and women." There was a suggestion of all gender, but we think the compromise is to just take out any reference there, and it would read "wildlife resources and benefit equitably from legal and sustainable management," and not draw any particular attention to gender there. I didn't hear any changes to little b. Then the other one was decision 20BB, and there was an additional paragraph added there by Madagascar. And so I'm asking if that could be accepted. The other paragraphs, A, B, C, D, would remain the same. And then decision 20CC, there were no changes to 20CC. Okay, so if that's, I've got Kenya wishing to speak on the decisions, I hope.
Yes, Madam Chair, and sorry for getting you back. We support decision 20AA, and we'll want to align with the proposal by Poland to delete 20CC, but have some amendments to 20BB. Madam Chair, if you allow, I'll read the amendment. That 20BB will direct the Secretariat to compile and make available via notifications, that's a new addition, information received from parties under decision 20AA paragraph B. Compile and make available via notifications information received from parties under decision 20AA paragraph B. And what that will mean, that BCD becomes irrelevant and can be deleted.
So can I look to other standing committee members if they have any reaction? We've had new changes proposed to the decisions. Can we accept those changes? I have Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry for this, but I think I not completely understand the suggestion proposed by Kenya. We would need to check and maybe what we could do, and I know this will produce even more work, but we may try to work together in the group that we established in the previous item to discuss this, because it's getting too complicated, and I think it's fair to understand each one proposal. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid sending the draft decisions to the working group if I can, because this won't be a drafting group. This will be a working group, because I've had many parties wishing to speak on the resolution in particular and have not been able to do that because of time. But I see your suggestion, and I know Poland is asking to speak in Kuwait, so I will take those two interventions, and then I think I will strike the working group.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We just wanted to come back to Kenya's proposal. We can agree to amendment proposed by Kenya on 20BB. Thank you.
All right, I will take Kuwait yet, and then I will discuss the working group.
Thank you, Chair. We do not support the amendment made by Kenya. And if it's possible to take these decisions also to the working group. Thank you.
Yeah, the chair. All right, I will create a working group. I look to Zambia. Would they be willing to chair this working group? Zambia, is that you pressed your button, is that a yes?
Yes, would be able to, Chair.
Thank you. So then I will look to the composition. This is a working group, so it will be open to standing committee members, parties, and observer organizations. And we'll try for equal balance. So I ask, please do not press the button yet until I ask for it, so I can have a clean screen, please, to get the composition. I will first ask now any standing committee members wishing to be in this group, please press your button so we can capture it. So yes, Secretariat, please read them out. I have 5 standing committee members requesting to be in this working group.
Thank you, Chair. There's 6 standing committee members, which are Kenya, UK, Madagascar, Brazil, Poland, DRC, and also recognize Indonesia has now pressed. So there are 7 in total. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, can you unpress your button so I can move on to parties wishing to join? I will give you a minute, at which point please press your buttons now. I will stop now because the list isn't moving anymore. So I will ask the Secretariat to read out the parties asking to join the working group. I have 14 when I said stop.
Thank you, Chair. They are Peru, Gabon, South Africa, Russian Federation, Mexico, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, China, Botswana, Canada, Tanzania, Germany, Ecuador, and Namibia. Thank you, Chair.
And now I have a clean screen, so I will open it up to observer organizations. And I will stop now because the numbers were stable. I have 11 observer organizations, so I think we're okay on a balance. So I will ask, I have 12, but that's stop. So I will ask the Secretariat to read out the 12 observer organizations.
Thank you, Chair. They are WCS, IUCN, FAO, David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation. Sorry if I've not called you correctly. Born Free, WWF, Association of Northeast Fish and Wildlife Agencies, Traffic, IFF. Sorry, I'd like to just request that you undo your button if your names have already been called. Thank you. IWMC. Sorry, just checking. Wildlife Ranching South Africa. And that's it, thank you.
And I see that DRC is asking for the floor.
Sorry.
I see the DRC is asking for the floor. Can I ask you to be brief, please?
Merci, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to the working group, we didn't hear the name DRC listed as members of the working group. I just wanted to double check with you. Thank you, Madam.
You are in the working group. Senegal, are you requesting to be in the working group?
Oui, merci Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam. We do think that Senegal really is entitled to be given the floor as well as to have a seat in the working group, given the work we've done. Thank you.
Senegal, you are in the working group now, but I really can't give you the floor. You can bring your comments to the working group. As I said, we are running out of time very quickly, and you can have these discussions in the working group. And so the working group will essentially consider the draft decisions in Annex 3, Document 28, and based on the discussion that we heard here in plenary. And they will also review the resolution, the amendments to the resolution 16.6 based on the discussion that was had here in plenary and the amendments that were proposed. And those of you that made amendments here in plenary, please be prepared to bring them to the working group so that they can be adequately discussed. Thank you. I'd like to move on to agenda item number 17, cooperation with the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPIS Assessment Report on the Sustainable Use of Wildlife Species, Decision 19.29, and I give the floor to the Animals Committee Chair to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do it on behalf of Switzerland, as Switzerland has been chairing that working group. So at COP19, parties adopted a set of decisions with the aim to review the thematic assessment from IPES on the sustainable use of wild species. In particular, what this assessment can tell CITES and how CITES is tackling the issues raised in this important assessment. At SC77, the Standing Committee established an intersessional working group with a mandate to review the assessment, identify resolutions and decisions which cover the issues identified by IPES assessment, the results of the same exercise carried out by the Animals Committee and Plants Committees, and identify aspects relevant to CITES that are not yet adequately covered by existing resolutions and decisions. Annex 1 to the document contains a preliminary list of relevant CITES resolutions, decisions, processes considered by the 77th meeting of the Standing Committee and updated based on inputs received from the members of the Standing Committee Intersessional Working Group. Annex 2 includes the aspects relating to drivers of sustainable use and knowledge gaps, challenges, and research priorities with the amendments by PC 27 and AC 33 referred to the Standing Committee for consideration. The next step in the whole process could be to identify resolutions that could benefit from a revision to address the findings in the IPES thematic assessment on the sustainable use of wild species. If the committee sees merit in making this next step, the draft decisions in paragraph 9 could be considered by the committee. It has to be noted that due to lack of time, this set of draft decisions could not be finally reviewed by the members of the Intersession Working Group and therefore may merit some further discussion. So the Standing Committee is invited to note the annexes to the present document, review and submit the draft decisions in paragraph 9 for consideration by COP20, and agree that decisions 1928 and 1929 have been implemented and can be deleted. Thank you, Chair.
I understand the IPIS Secretariat is here, so I will give them the floor to follow this introduction.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and greetings to all.
It is a great pleasure for IPBES to take the floor today following our participation at COP19 and last year's meetings of the Plants and Animals Committees. At its 9th session in 2022, the IPBES plenary approved the assessment of the sustainable use of wild species. We note the detailed information in document 17 of the present meeting and express our appreciation to the Standing Committee and the Plants and Animals Committees who have undertaken a comprehensive review of the scientific aspects of the assessment and their relevance to the implementation of the Convention. We note in particular that CITES decisions and resolutions are related to key aspects of the IPBES assessment. For example, the overexploitation of marine and aquatic species in addition to terrestrial species, and the importance of addressing the drivers of sustainable use and related knowledge gaps, challenges, and research priorities. We would like to take this opportunity to thank the CITES Standing Committee, Plants and Animals Committees, and Secretariat for this thorough consideration of the IPBES assessment and hope that the assessment proves useful to the further implementation of CITES. In particular, we would like to cordially thank Mr. Matthias Lötscher, Chair of the Animals Committee, for his engagement and participation in the processes of IPBES over the years. As formal observer to the IPBES multidisciplinary expert panel, he ensured that IPBES is well informed of the work of CITES, and his knowledge and contributions were always highly valued by the IPBES experts. We also thank the CITES Secretariat for their continued support and engagement with the different processes of IPBES. In concluding, let me reassure you of IPBES' readiness to support the work of the CITES Standing Committee and COP on the IPBES assessment going forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I would like to open up the floor now for discussion among Standing Committee members. We are looking at the recommendations contained in paragraph 11, particularly the draft decisions. Not seeing any requests from Standing, I have Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With all the consideration of the work of IPBES that we great value, and Brazil is actually participating in the work, Brazil considers this work in CITES as a low priority item for discussion, since it does not directly address the core issues of the Convention. However, in general terms and in spirit of compromise, we can live with the document, as long as we make an important correction. We cannot agree on the use of the term driver of sustainable use, because it conveys a message that sustainable use is a negative idea when it's the opposite. The document makes confusion with the term and does not refer properly to the IPBES finding B2, which states that the sustainability of the use of wild species is influenced negatively and positively by multiple drivers. We can accept the term, for instance, assessment of sustainable use, as used in decision 19.28, which shall replace all the reference of drivers of sustainable use in the document. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have Israel.
Thank you, Chair. The IPBES report is a very important report, and it was had a lot of information that we submitted about CITES also, and as well as other parties, I'm sure. And there's no doubt that there's a lot of aspects of the IPBES report that are important also for CITES. But to review all the resolutions seems like a very daunting project, and we would propose maybe some sort of pilot project looking at some subset of resolutions, because this could become a huge project. we don't have any specific language, but or maybe in 20XX, where it says review the resolutions, and maybe the standing committee could choose a subset of resolutions and not all the resolutions, as opposed to, because of the great deal of work this would be. The IPBES report certainly highlighted that exploitation or overexploitation of wild species is one of the major drivers of the extinction risk, and this cannot be ignored, and this is something that we don't agree with Brazil's proposal to change the wording. Thank you, Chair.
Any other standing committee members? I open the floor to observer parties, and I have Mexico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mexico and Canada deeply value the work of IPBES and welcomes the findings of the report, Assessment on Sustainable Use of Wild Species. We see the report as a key tool to ensure evidence-based decision-making regarding the sustainable use and management of wild species. At the same time, we are concerned that the work proposed to review a substantial number of resolutions, decisions, and other documents outlined in the annex may overlie significant considering the workload of the Convention. In this vein, we are wondering if scoping out the work more strategically can be warranted. Considering that decisions are short-term actions and time-bound, we recommend focusing solely on resolutions and deleting all decisions outlined in Annex 1. The removal of decisions is not meant to diminish their importance or status. The purpose of our proposal is to prioritize the review of long-term policy actions rather than decisions that they become obsolete once they have been completed. Additionally, we recommend including a new paragraph A bis in the proposed draft decisions 20XX that would clarify that the first step of this process will be to identify which key resolutions possibly require amendments considering the findings of the thematic report. The paragraph would read as follows. A bis, identify key resolutions that may require amendments, taking into consideration the review outlined under paragraph A. Finally, upon further consideration, we would like to offer some comments in Annex 1. We believe that 13 resolutions could be added to the table. For easy reference, these comments have been submitted through information document 39. And just to be very brief, those are related to registration of nurseries, bears, traditional medicines, Tibetan antelope, tortoise and freshwater turtles, stony corals, ranching, sturgeons, registration of captive breeding operations of Appendix 1 species, cooperation ex situ in situ invasive species, cooperation between CITES and ITTO, and Agerwood. So we welcome the Standing Committee thoughts on our proposal. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have the USA.
As with our last intervention, the United States would like to note for the record that we are unable to take a position on this agenda item at this time. Thank you.
Argentina.
Gracias, señor. Thank you, Madam Chair. Argentina discourages the focus on the approach on this as the only one that's available for internal policy. Argentina observes, as we've mentioned at other opportunities, that there's an inappropriate progress on the sovereignty on states in decision by technical assessors from within international organizations. So Argentina would like to express its concern for the predominance or imposition of partial decisions with the aim of universalization. We suggest replacing transformative change with sustainable change or change towards sustainability in relation to the many references to Agenda 2030 and its sustainable development goals. Argentina remits itself to the statement which we hope will be noted in the minutes of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on China.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As one of the lead authors of the IB's assessment, we believe that reviewing the drivers the assessment demonstrated is crucial for the development of CITES. So China suggests keeping the terms used in the draft decision. China also supports the revised draft decision proposed by Canada and Mexico. Thank you, Chair.
I have Poland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We welcome the document prepared by the working group. We agree in general that there could be merit in making amendments to resolutions and incorporating aspects from the findings of the IPBES thematic assessment, where it could enhance the implementation of the convention. We support the recommendations presented with amendments made to the decision as suggested by Israel and Mexico, and we don't support Brazil amendments. Thank you.
The UK.
Thank you, Chair. I would just quickly like to say that we would also support the comments made by Brazil and Canada and thank them for preparing the helpful INF doc. Thank you.
I'll open the floor to a few interventions by observer organizations, and I have the Animal Alliance of Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would support the comments made by Israel. We'd note that the table in Annex 1 lists 50 resolutions alone, just resolutions that could be considered for review. We can't say at this stage whether any of these would actually need to be revised or that any proposed revision would be acceptable to the parties. So a review at this scale could require a huge investment of time and resources with no guarantee of a useful outcome. We agree with Canada and Mexico that there is no point in reviewing decisions, but we're concerned that their amendments in INF 39 add a further 20 resolutions to the list. Adopting this list would make an already cumbersome task even worse. We propose instead that the Standing Committee direct the Secretariat, as Israel suggested, to suggest a small number of resolutions, probably about half a dozen perhaps, as the subjects of a pilot review to determine if a wider revision in line with the IPBES findings would be appropriate or useful. We note this has been the approach parties have used for other reviews in the past, to select a small subset and then move forward. The conclusions of this limited approach could then provide guidance to the parties on the advisability of committing resources to a further review. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll move on, take WCS, and then I'm going to pause to consult with the Secretariat and see a way forward, hopefully. WCS.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. We agree with the intervention from Israel and Poland and the last Animal Alliance of Canada. And we believe there needs to be a process, but we also recommend a small pilot project, just 6 resolutions. We're strongly supportive of the IPBES process, IPBES assessments. We call attention to the Nexus assessment as well, which is very useful. But IPBES does not mandate revision of entire intergovernmental regimes. And we believe that the list of resolutions there is cumbersome. There needs to be a process to identify which resolutions require amendment. So we suggest, we agree with Israel and Poland, slow down, just look and come up with 5 or 6 resolutions that might need revision. Thank you, but we think the list of resolutions there, and there needs to be a process to determine what is meant by a key resolution. Thank you, Chair. Siempre.
All right, I asked the Standing Committee to listen to where I think we are now in summarizing this. And So that the Standing Committee agrees to note the annexes to the present document with the amendments proposed to Annex 1 to delete decisions and only focus on resolutions. Little paragraph B would change to read, the Standing Committee agrees to submit the draft decisions in paragraph 9 as amended by including a new subparagraph to identify key resolutions that may require amendments taking into consideration the reviewed outline under paragraph A. And I heard no changes proposed for C, so C would remain as is, and the Standing Committee agrees to little paragraph C. So the changes are to A and B based on the discussion heard here. So I'm looking for the Standing Committee's agreement that this is the way forward. I see some heads nodding and some smiles, so I will take it. And silence is agreement too. All right, we'll move on to the next agenda item.
Madam.
Brazil.
Sorry, Madam Chair, but I asked for the floor. We can agree with that suggestion, but we cannot agree, and I was very clear in my previous intervention, that in the use of the term drivers of sustainable use.
No, the chair notes that you did not agree with that text, but I heard no support in the interventions, particularly from Standing Committee members, that there was support to change that first sentence in the decision.
Chair, I understand, but there is no mandate to, in the decision of the COP, to use that term. So we cannot agree. I'm sorry, but we cannot agree with that. With moving forward with this term.
Let me consult with the Secretariat on the because you're questioning the mandate to consider that term. All right, the chair takes Brazil's point, and in the spirit of compromise offers this suggestion to 20X. The decision, little a, would read as follows. Review the resolutions identified by the Animals and Plants Committees in document PC 27, document 10, AC document 33, document 11, and the Standing Committee in document SC 78, document 17, on the IPBES assessment report on the sustainable use of wild species relevant to the implementation of the convention. And therefore, we've basically eliminated that descriptive language rather than trying to wordsmith it, and just recall what's in the documents. Brazil?
Thank you very much for your suggestion. I think we can go in that direction. The only question remaining is when we consider the name of the annex that contains the terminology I was just referring. So perhaps we could also try to address that in your conclusion, Madam Chair, so that we don't maintain this kind of confusion in the future. Thank you very much.
Brazil, the suggestion I will make is we take note of that comment, but the title really does refer back to the IPES document and what terminology they used. So we will take note of your comment, but we will not change the title of the annex. And I also, I really do not want to take more time on this. I hope that in the spirit of compromise, you can accept this way forward.
The issue, Madam Chair, is that the report from IPBES does not use that terminology. The report from IPBES in B2, they say the sustainable use of wild species is influenced negatively or positively by multiple drivers. They don't refer to the drivers of sustainable use. So there is a very important issue on that regard. And so I'm sorry for taking too long. I understand that we need to move forward, but this is quite important. Sorry for that.
Chapter 4 of the IPES document is entitled, The Drivers of the Sustainable Use of Wild Species. And so that is the title that we are using. If you had issues with that title in the assessment, it should have been raised at IPES. Brazil, this is the last time I'm giving you the floor on this one.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So in the spirit of compromise, we will accept to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I will move on to the agenda item that will also take considerable time. So essentially, I'm moving on to document 31, National Laws for Implementation of the Convention, decisions 19.60 and 19.61. I'll give you a minute. And I will call on the Secretariat to introduce this document.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this is the easiest and not the hardest. The document summarizes progress made by parties concerning their CITES national legislation. It provides an overview of the numbers of parties with legislation in Category 1, 2, and 3 of the National Legislation Project, and details updates on parties in Category 2 and 3, including parties subjected to a trade suspension, identified as priority, or having received formal warnings from the Standing Committee. The document also provides a draft guidance on the implementation of the Convention in exceptional circumstances that impede the proper functioning of CITES at the national level. There are several updates to provide on these documents. 1. Uganda has adopted a legislation meeting requirements for Category 1. 2. The correction requested by the United Kingdom on Montserrat has been reflected on the country profile on the CITES website. 3. The update on Ecuador's legislation is contained in document 33.6 on the application of Article 13 in Ecuador and Peru. At paragraph 12, it is to note that Zambia has been issued with only one formal warning at SC 74. There was no formal warning issued at SC 77. 5. Myanmar has been omitted in paragraph 49C, but is indeed recommended for a formal warning from the Standing Committee based on the determination made in paragraph 48. 6. The Secretariat received a letter from Mongolia on 30 January on the ongoing work concerning national legislation. However, no draft legislation has been shared with the Secretariat, and the letter does not provide details on the ongoing work or the timeline for adoption of the national legislation. The update has therefore been deemed insufficient to modify the Secretariat's recommendation concerning Mongolia. 7. In the last days, the Secretariat has received additional information from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bhutan, Kyrgyzstan, Sudan, and Macau Special Administrative Region of China. The Secretariat will review this information and report on it at COP20. The Standing Committee is invited to commend Andorra, Botswana, Lao PDR, Sierra Leone, Tunisia, and Uganda for the placement of their legislation in Category 1, to issue a formal warning to the following parties: Afghanistan, Antigua and Barbuda, Cabo Verde, Chad, Eritrea, Iraq, Myanmar, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the Syrian Arab Republic. And the Secretariat is also invited to consider the suggested draft guidance on exceptional circumstances and request the Secretariat to make it available after any amendment on the CITES website. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, ask the interpreters for an extra 10 minutes in the hope that we can resolve this one quickly.
Yes, Chair. Yes.
Thank you, interpreters. And I would like the Standing Committee, open the floor to the Standing Committee to discuss the recommendations in paragraph 49. I have Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We thank the Secretariat for the extensive report, and we want to congratulate the countries that have been placed in Category 1. We support the recommendations in view of the national legislation, and we also want to thank the Secretariat for their elaboration on a possible guiding principle for handling of exceptional circumstances impeding the proper function of CITES at the national level. We support the way forward, and we welcome the idea of issuing a notification to obtain further input on the suggested guiding principles. But in addition, we would like to suggest allowing parties to review the finalized guidance before making it available on the CITES website. Thank you.
I call on the UK.
Thank you, Chair. Adequate legislation is fundamental for meeting the aims of the Convention, and so we congratulate Uganda as well for their Category 1 legislation. We support the adoption of the Secretariat's recommendations in A through C in paragraph 49 with the updates provided by the Secretariat in their introduction. Further to recommendations D and E, we'd like the process for developing and agreeing guidance on the implementation of the Convention in the event of exceptional circumstances to be clearer and more collaborative, giving parties the opportunity to review, comment on, and discuss at COP20. So it would be helpful if the draft could, it would also be helpful if the draft could include examples of events where the principle of force majeure might apply. We've set out our thoughts on what the process should be for agreeing this guidance, which we can run through and have suggestions to the recommendations to reflect that, if that's helpful.
I'll come back to you on that. I now will open the floor to observer parties. I have the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam. I wanted to comment on the exceptional circumstances. We would like to emphasize in the guidance provided by the Secretariat, there is an effort to define such circumstances with some elements that are beyond the CITES mandate and are not extensive or conclusive. We particularly refer to paragraphs 35 and 41. The information contained in the paragraphs is also not in line with the original requests in the document 31 from SC 77. Therefore, we would like to register our disagreement with the assessment as provided in these paragraphs and believe that they deserve better consideration during the COP. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the USA.
Thank you, Chair. The United States, speaking on behalf of the United States, we congratulate the several parties for their efforts leading to their legislation being placed in Category 1, and other parties or territories that have made substantial progress in adopting measures for the effective implementation of the Convention. We're also encouraged by those parties that have plans to adopt the necessary legislation in 2025, which would allow their national legislation to be placed in Category 1 at SC 79. With regard to recommendation B in the document, we would reference our earlier intervention where we indicated our preference that the decision on these matters would be deferred to a later CITES meeting. With regard to recommendation C, we support requesting the Secretariat to issue a formal warning to parties that have not reported any legislative progress for more than 4 years. With regard to recommendation D, concerning the preliminary results of the draft guidance, we offer the following observations. We continue to stress the importance of ensuring that the guidance considers ways not to obstruct legitimate trade while also ensuring that loopholes are not created, allowing for trade to be conducted contrary to the provisions of the Convention. Additionally, we continue to believe that guidance should make clear that the types of trade permitted in exceptional circumstances must be limited to those necessary under the circumstances, to include, for example, only non-commercial trade for purposes such as law enforcement, diagnostic samples for scientific research, reintroduction into the wild, or the health and safety of a living specimen in an emergency for rescue or veterinary treatment. With regard to how to proceed concerning the guidance as outlined in recommendation E, we also support having the parties have an opportunity to revisit this draft guidance before it being finalized, and therefore we would recommend that the Standing Committee request the Secretariat to incorporate comments from SC 78 into the draft guidance, invite further inputs through a notification to the parties, and make the draft guidance available to COP20 for review and consideration for approval. And finally, we support the recommendation in paragraph 50 for the Standing Committee to recognize and welcome the support of parties, development partners, and others. Thank you, Chair.
I have Israel.
Yes, very briefly, Chair, we support pretty much all the comments by the United States with just one small change in the draft paragraph 49E. It talks about where these comments should be made available. Because these are exceptional circumstances we're talking about, this should be really analyzed to be sure that these are only done the right things, right times. Therefore, we would request that instead of these coming to the 20th meeting of the Conference of Parties, these should first be reviewed at SC 81. Thank you, Chair.
I have Kenya.
Madam Chair, I'd like to firstly congratulate Uganda on placement to Category 1. And as for Kenya, at SC 77, we reported that we were in the process of making amendments to our wildlife legislation, the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act of 2013, to address the gaps, making it not qualify for Category 1 placement of the CITES national legislation. Following a review of the process to make the amendments in 2024, a comprehensive and wholesome review of the Wildlife Act was recommended as opposed to a piecemeal amendment. As reported by the Secretariat in this document, SC 78 document 31.1, we have submitted an update on the progress of the process in November 2024, providing a roadmap towards delivery of an updated legislation. In the roadmap, we have indicated that we would be submitting to the Secretariat for review and comments the draft legislation by 30th of March 2025. Madam Chair, before coming to this meeting, the team steering the legislation review process advised that the 30th March 2025 timeline for delivery of the draft legislation for comments by the Secretariat may not be feasible, and so we request for an extension of up to May 2025. Madam Chair, we provide this update and a commitment that we are working towards realizing an updated legislation by the end of the year, and which, when assessed, will be found adequate for the implementation of the Convention and its placement in Category 1 of the CITES national legislation. We will be sharing with the Secretariat in the next few days an updated roadmap. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I now open the floor to observer parties. Observer organizations. Have WCS.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. We appreciate the progress by many parties and regret that several countries still are not in compliance, and we appreciate the analysis and recommendations of the Secretariat. We appreciate the comments of Belgium, the UK, and Israel on paragraphs 49 and D and E. We're very surprised by the text in paragraphs 34 to 45 on potential exceptional circumstances, which we don't believe belong in this document. We recommend that this committee not agree with the recommendations in 49D and E because there really is a risk of creating unintentional loopholes, but agree with the recommendation of Israel to have a thoughtful process and for the Secretary to present a draft with examples for consideration by SC 81. We think this is very serious, but should not be rushed into. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I will consult with the Secretariat, see if we can wrap this up quickly. So what I'm looking for agreement on, and what the Standing Committee agrees to, recommendation A, B, C, with the update provided by the Secretariat. So I didn't hear any problems with that. I'm looking for the Standing Committee to adopt that. I see nodding heads. And now I'll take a minute to consult on D and E, because I think we've had quite a bit of discussion on that one, and see if I can come up with a way forward for Standing Committee. All right, I'm going to take a stab at what I think, based on the discussion I heard, is the way forward for D and E, and maybe it needs some wordsmithing, but let's try this. Request the Secretariat to issue a notification to the parties to seek their inputs on the preliminary guidance on the implementation of the Convention in exceptional circumstances, taking into account any comments made at SC 78. Submit a revised guidance for the consideration for the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. I see shaking heads. I have the UK.
Thanks, Chair. I think broadly we could support that. In the second part of the recommendation that you were running through, I think it might be helpful to submit guidance and any recommendations to COP20, given the context of what we're talking about.
Thank you, UK. I think we can do that. I see Israel nodding their head. Do they?
As we said before, we'd rather see this guidance get to the Standing Committee and have it at the Standing Committee and not take the time of the Conference of the Parties to review this, because it's exceptional circumstances. It needs a more in-depth discussion.
I'd like to hear what the rest of the committee, Standing Committee, feels about this. This is an issue of timing, whether it goes to COP20 or comes back to the Standing Committee at SC 81. So any other thoughts from standing committee members on which approach? Because I think I'm seeing it split. Have Kuwait?
Thank you, Chair. We support your approach to move forward. Thank you.
This is one of those times where I'm taking silence as somehow agreeing with the suggestion the chair made. So this is the last chance if you disagree with the suggestion made by the chair, because I've only heard from one standing committee member. I've heard from two that can support and live with it, and I've heard from one that they disagree with it. So silence is agreement. Have Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. We align ourselves with the suggestion from the Chair. Thank you.
In seeing some nodding heads and some confusion, I think I will go with the consensus that the Standing Committee agrees to the decision that I read out in place of the previous D&E, and we will break for lunch. Oh, sorry, I'm forgetting paragraph 50. Standing Committee agrees to recognize and welcome the support provided by parties. I don't need to read it out, but we basically, Standing Committee agrees to paragraph 50 in the document. And then we have housekeeping announcements.
Thank you, Chair. Immediately after the session is over, we have the Shark Working Group meeting in room B. Shark Working Group in room B. And we have the Finance and Budget Subcommittee, which will meet in room number 12. Room number 12 for the Finance and Budget Subcommittee. Without notifying the rooms, I'm also going to just give you as an advance notice that this evening there is a working group on sharks, drafting group on eels, drafting group on engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And also tomorrow morning, there will be a working group on livelihoods. And I will announce the rooms as they come along. Thank you.